All right, welcome everybody to another episode of VALR Unfiltered, Money, Meaning and Society. And today I have the great pleasure to welcome Dr. David Palmer, who is a wonderful person, heads anthropology at the Hong Kong University. So welcome, David.
Hi, Ben.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you indeed. Yeah. So, are you, where are you right now?
I'm currently in Hong Kong. I've been spending a couple of months in Vietnam, and now I'm in Hong Kong. And actually, tomorrow I'm headed to Turkey.
Oh, wonderful.
Uh,
Wonderful.
yeah, of course, by the time this is actually published, I will be in Turkey. But I'm greatly looking forward to that. We're going to a conference which is called the Istanbul Blockchain Week. And there will be lots of interesting conversations that we hope to have there. So David is, of course, a man I respect a lot. I've known you for many, many years in Hong Kong. But for the audience, and most of our audience are actually based in South Africa, I would love it for you to introduce yourself. That would be really great.
Okay, well, hi everybody on this podcast. My name is David Palmer. I'm a professor of sociology and anthropology at the University of Hong Kong. I'm a specialist in the transformations of Chinese culture and society, and my research has taken me into the depths of Chinese philosophical and spiritual traditions and history, but it's also nowadays it's taking me into China's expansion into the rest of the world, particularly in the global south through the Belt and Road Initiative. And so actually in my research in the past few years, I've been to all of the countries that you just mentioned as part of my research. I spent a wonderful 2 weeks doing ethnographic research in South Africa. About a year and a half ago. I was also in Turkey recently and Vietnam, and been to many other countries such as the UAE, Pakistan, Nepal, Laos, Saudi Arabia, really investigating the deeper social and cultural dimensions of China's deepening engagements in those countries through the Belt and Road Initiative.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's actually very fascinating, David. What a privilege that you had to travel to all these countries.
Indeed it has. Indeed it has. All wonderful countries, by the way. It's been a delight.
Wow, that's really wonderful. So also for your context and for the audience's context, of course, most of these podcasts relate in some way or another to Bitcoin. However, it's been more of an exploration of the meaning of wealth, the meaning of prosperity, explorations of progress. And so in this particular podcast, while we might refer a little bit to Bitcoin, it's really more focused on China, the concept of civilization and progress that I hope to discuss with you. So perhaps a few people might know that a few months ago I had the wonderful opportunity at your invitation to speak at Hong Kong University, where together with your students we explored Bitcoin and the concept of true prosperity. We spoke about, maybe to remind you, we spoke about the scarcity of Bitcoin, how it precludes arbitrary money printing, which of course ties into inflation. But also how sound money could potentially be supportive of peace, and I think especially in these days that's an important topic or realization, perhaps, that the type of money that we ascribe to as a society might actually influence the way we spend as a jurisdiction or as a power block, and yeah, I think, of course, it's these things are slow to progress. It's all gradual, and so much of what we say is speculation because it's unclear how the future will unfold. But nonetheless, David, I would love to hear a little bit. I know maybe it's not so fresh in your memory, but at least I would like to know if that discussion has kind of led you in any way to think differently about Bitcoin, or where you stand on Bitcoin? Are you still skeptical? Like, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, right. So indeed, that was just such a great presentation that you gave in our class on the master's program in family wealth management at the University of Hong Kong. That was a few months ago. It was an extremely enlightening talk because, to be honest, I don't really know much about Bitcoin. I've heard various types of discourses about it and blockchain and things like that. But I'm a very uh, in fact, I don't engage in a lot of these kinds of investments, whether it's Bitcoin, but even more traditional types of investment. In fact, I only invest in real estate. I invest in hard assets, nothing that is volatile or virtual in any way, sense, or form, partly because I don't trust banks. And I guess that is somewhere that I stand very much aligned, I believe, with Bitcoin enthusiasts. I don't really want to put all my wealth in the hands of a bank, although I suppose you can't really extract yourself from that type of system nowadays. But I haven't really had that much time to really investigate the intricacies of Bitcoin, and so your talk was very enlightening for me. And I guess what I am really interested in the way that different forms of money actually influence our consciousness. The types of values and even ways of thinking that are embedded in the way that we conceive of, um, exchange, and use money that actually, in a sense, open up different types of circuitry in our brains or in our consciousness, which actually lead us to think differently, and of course, which create both opportunities and constraints on our engagement with the material world. And so there were a few really interesting points that you made about Bitcoin that do remain with me, and that is the idea of money that a form of money that's not centrally controlled or administered, and also that can't expand infinitely. And so, what are the implications of this? It's interesting because I was teaching a seminar just a little more than a month ago at Zhejiang University in China about um, a book that actually you guys should read by the famous anthropology David Graeber called Debt, The First 5,000 Years, which would be a great sequel to Ben's thin book on money and value. It actually touches on a lot of these topics, but a very heavy tome that I think is about, here it is, yeah. Um, oh, is that coming backwards?
No, it may show up properly on the
Okay, right,
final
right, right.
recording.
So, but look how thick it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so this is actually an anthropological study of the history of human civilization and how human civilization has dealt with money and debt throughout all of its history, and it's really fascinating. And there's one really fascinating discussion in this book. Um, I'm actually a specialist on religion. That's my original academic specialty, and everything I do in my research on anything contemporary in society today, I always do bring it back to the religious and spiritual dimensions. So, one interesting thing is that there is this idea of the axial age, a period of time around 500 BC, where at almost simultaneously in different parts of the world, China, India, Greece, and the Middle East, new philosophical, spiritual, and religious traditions emerged. So we had Buddhism and Taoism emerging in China, Taoism and Confucianism emerging in China, Buddhism and new forms of Hindu spirituality emerging in India, the Greek Socratic tradition in Greece, and the Hebrew prophetic tradition among the Jewish people. And all of these traditions, in one sense, they have their differences, but there's something that they all have in common, which is that for the first time in history, they really called on the individual to transcend the ego and to reach to a higher spiritual plane. So before that, there were all kinds of different religion around the world, but people were worshiping their gods, and it didn't necessarily have a transcendental dimension. But now all of these traditions, they would tell each individual to really reflect on themselves and to kind of break away from the break away from the confines of the ego to find a higher level of spiritual freedom. Now, this is all very well known, but what is not as well known, and this is what David Graeber brings out in his book, that this actually happens, that this kind of the spiritual axial age happens at a time when money started to be widely used in all of these different parts of the world. And he claims that there's actually a connection between these two. And I was thinking about this more, that prior to the introduction of money, which allows which makes it possible to convert anything into anything, it also allows for relationships to be made commercial relationships to be made with ever wider circles of people. Because prior to money, people would not actually engage in barter, which is the common misconception, but people were engaged in constant networks of gift exchange. And actually, you've written about that, Ben, in your book. So the traditional society is based on all kinds of reciprocal relationships between people and groups, and those relationships are unique. My relationship with my parents, with my children, with my God, they can't be substituted for one another, and so these are highly, highly distinct relations. Now, when you end up using money, however, anybody can, in a sense, be replaced by anybody else. And so you can expand the scope of human relations to an unbelievable degree compared to what had existed prior to the development of money. So what are the implications of that? Actually, it leads to a number of implications. And one of them is that the individual actually comes into being, because you have your money, and that money is yours, because it's, and so this has some interesting connections with blockchain and Bitcoin, although what it is, I'm not quite sure. Money is completely anonymized, right? And so with money, you become an individual. You can imagine yourself having all kinds of relations with all kinds of people who are beyond the deep levels of family and community embeddedness that otherwise we would be in. And so, and everything can be converted into everything else. And so this kind of leads to a change of consciousness in which we are individuals accountable to ourselves, in a sense, or to one higher principle for the whole universe, in which all actions are also kind of moral, can be compared in a moral sense. And so we do have the notion of redemption in religion, right? You'll be redeemed for your debts. In a sense, anything that you've done that is bad, it can actually be compared to other bad things and good things that you've been done. So we have the idea of a reckoning, right? This is in the Abrahamic traditions. It is actually using the language of the ledger sheet. It's using the language of money, which is very, very interesting. So everything in your life becomes morally comparable. In the Eastern traditions, we have the notion of dharma, which is very much the same and actually uses banking vocabulary. So, you can do good deeds and get credits, and then you do bad deeds and you get debits. So what we could see is that money has actually profoundly transformed our way of thinking. And what we could also see is that when money was introduced, it allowed for the infinite greed. You could just have unlimited amounts of money, or you could dream of unlimited amounts of money. And so greed and materialism reached levels that could not be imagined in the past. But it's precisely at that moment that then the human consciousness kind of reaches the opposite, the imagination of a state of consciousness or a spiritual realm where there is absolutely no greed, where we are actually completely selfless. And so in a sense, the evil that can be generated by money also leads to the consciousness of the possibility of infinite goodness, compassion, selflessness, and cosmic and universal meaning. So in a sense, the different, what is the configuration of money, Bitcoin, these different types of currencies that are now emerging, will that lead or be associated with another transformation of consciousness? I'm sure it will, but it's hard for me to imagine the deeper implications of something like Bitcoin for that transformation of consciousness.
I think that is very, very fascinating, David. I love that whole analysis. It's the idea as well that like with a new technology and with new capacities for good also come capacities for evil, and they kind of, you could say, balance each other out, or at least they allow for both ways in a sense.
Right.
I think that's really fascinating. I think also your contribution, even already in this discussion, is very unique. And many Bitcoiners will be familiar with Debt, the book that you mentioned. And also, actually, myself, I think about the axial age. I'm not sure. Is the writer, is his surname Bell? Is that it by any chance? Do you know the main? There's a big book, and it was written. It's about the axial age. It's a very big book.
Oh, Robert
I think
Bella.
He was an anthropologist.
Yeah, Robert Bella.
Yes.
I have it back
Yeah.
here. It's right on my shelf back there somewhere. Yeah. Robert Bella. Religion and Human Evolution. Yeah.
Yeah, I have it in my cupboard in Holland. I haven't opened it for many years, but it's a very fascinating thought, the axial age, and we might be living in a new axial age right now.
That's right. I think
so. I think that's really fascinating. And I think, even if you yourself might not have the exact kind of insights into how Bitcoin plays into that, I think for many of our audience members and also my colleagues, including, the CEO of VALR, who is also a kind of a deep thinker, I'm sure this will kind of spur his thoughts as well. And together we can approach the truth, I hope. Mm-hmm. So David, I think this is very fitting. And I would like to bring the conversation a little bit more towards China. So, as I mentioned to you, a lot of our audience members are actually based in South Africa, one of the BRICS countries, I guess. But generally, discourse around Bitcoin and crypto is dominated by American media, English-speaking kind of media outlets, and it takes place on Twitter, or what is now called X. And you'll notice very quickly that this discourse is satiated with skepticism towards China. But at the same time, it's important to know that China is a major holder of Bitcoin, amassed through seizures and also because of a long history of Bitcoin mining in China, especially in the early days. So there's a lot of crypto wealth, as we call it. But their policies have shifted over the years. You can imagine it's not always in favor of decentralized technologies. China is a large jurisdiction that wants to, of course, protect its kind of monetary sovereignty, I would say. Capital controls, all these types of things come into play. Nonetheless, it's an important country. And it could be that a lot of this skepticism towards China is unfounded or misguided. And so what I was hoping for this kind of section of the podcast is to ask you really more about, in your view and your experience, what kind of civilization is actually aimed for? You know, what type of civilization is China aiming to build, to construct, to create? And what are some of the key elements of that civilization, in your view?
So actually, this is a great question because I was actually just earlier this morning, I was writing up a report on a research project that I've been working on, which is on the Chinese notion of Da Tong, which means the great unity, which is a core concept for China's self-understanding of its civilization. Um, and what's really interesting is this idea, dato means great unity, great oneness, or great commonwealth. It's an idea that came up around that axial age that I just mentioned, actually a little earlier, but it was edited and brought to the fore by Confucius, which at that time was actually talking about a golden age in the past where everybody lived in harmony. Um, um, all of the interests of all the people were taken care of. Everybody's talents were flourishing to the best of their abilities. Everybody was, the men and the women, the young and the old, were all playing their roles in ways that were complementary, taking care of each other's needs, where there were no corrupt officials. Everybody was honest and their doors were open and unlocked. And so this is an ideal world in which everybody is living in unity. And actually, it is a kind of an underlying, I would say, core value in Chinese traditional culture. And it's actually also an idea that it had been under there kind of for more than 2,500 years, but it came to the fore at the end of the 19th century when many Chinese intellectuals and philosophers who were looking at China was now facing the West. The West was coming in and extracting wealth from China, invading and defeating China in wars, carving China into different spheres of influence, putting China into a kind of a semi-colonial state. And Chinese intellectuals were they were trying to figure out, what is the position of China in this new world, and how can we absorb all the great things that the West has developed, but also how can we retain our the great things that our civilization has produced. And it was very interesting that the notion of datong, this great unity, just became a common kind of intellectual currency, so to speak, among people of all different kinds of ideologies, philosophical and religious backgrounds, traditionalists, modernists. They were all trying to search for what would China's future be, but they would all bring it back to this notion of datong, to the great unity. And what I've noticed is that it really represented a certain kind of cosmopolitan ideal, that they wanted China to be a prosperous and respected nation within a world family of nations that would live in peace. And so they really saw the future of China, this datong, as being something that's not only for China, but actually for the whole world. That's really how they envisioned the future of humanity, as a future of the great oneness, the great harmony, the great commonwealth. But actually what was interesting is that they changed the meaning of the term. So there was no longer looking back at a golden age of the past, but actually looking to the future, and a future that would be evolving in a progressive way with a high level of science and technology. So they really wanted to absorb and incorporate everything that the West was bringing in terms of science and technology, but graft it on to those Chinese values of harmony for the family, for the nation, and for the whole world. And actually, I think now the word datong isn't used so widely as it was in the first half of the 20th century, although everybody knows it. And whenever you mention it, people, they smile, it's really a deep value that Chinese people have. But although it's not always mentioned, but it really underlies, I think, a lot of what motivates how China sees its current development and its development toward the future. So really, a growing into a scientific and technologically highly advanced society that is taking care of its people so that there will be no homeless people in the streets, no people living in poverty, that all people are enjoying at least a basically good standard of living, if not a very good one, where there is order in the society, no violence, where people can feel safe. And also in a world where everybody is, where the different nations of the world are also living in harmony with each other. So I think that really is this idea of datong and the modern iteration of datong. If you understand that, then you can understand where China is today and where it's going.
That's really inspiring, actually. And I've lived in China. I mean, I've lived in Hong Kong for maybe 9 years now, but in China as well for 1 year. And I remember going there, having never been to China before, and there was a little bit of, I guess, there was some fear. Maybe it's just the fear of the unknown. Now, some of that fear was well-founded, since my first meal was la jiao niu rou, and it was basically a plate full of chili peppers with a little bit of beef inside. So that was well-founded. But in terms of my kind of daily, my lived experience in China, I felt very safe. And that wasn't just in the mainland, also in Hong Kong, I've always felt very safe. You can go into any alleyway at night or wherever it is and feel very safe. Of course, a very different experience from what I've seen and experienced in South Africa, and also actually very different from when I grew up in Holland. There's a lot more animosity, that I've grown up with. So I think, I can really relate to what you're saying, at least on the, at the local level. But I'm also very curious, and this is probably based on what you say, but maybe there's something to elaborate. Kind of how does China view its role in the world? And maybe to add to that, why do you think there's so much fear when it comes to China globally, as one of the big players? Yeah, how do you see that?
So I think just to build on what I was saying before, so there is a kind of a tension within this datong vision, because on the one hand it's a vision of world harmony and world unity, but it's also a vision which, at least historically, was one that, where is the center of that world harmony and that world unity? It's a Sinocentric vision. And so, but in the past, China means the Middle Kingdom, and China saw itself as in the middle of the world, but the world that it was aware of was a world that China was in the middle of. And, China is surrounded by high mountains, deserts, and oceans, and so there wasn't a very, very detailed understanding of much of the world far beyond China. So China was the middle, physically, and culturally at the middle of its own civilizational space. So, but now the world is becoming multipolar, and actually China supports this trend towards a multipolar world. But when you're engaging in this multipolar world, then how do you deal with that tension of the vision of world harmony, but one that traditionally is still very Sinocentric? so I think that's something that actually China is still trying to figure it out. Um, One of the other important values for China is, and this is also that you would have among neighbors, you will find in neighborhoods, and it's one reason why Chinese neighborhoods tend to be very safe, is that I take care of my family and you take care of your family. I don't interfere in your family's business and you don't interfere with mine, but we respect each other. And so, I have to take care of my family members. That's why they're not going to be lying out in the street homeless, because there are responsibilities for family members. So we will take care of each other. I take care of mine and you take care of yours. We respect each other. We deal with each other. We exchange. We do business. We exchange gifts with each other. We visit each other. We're hospitable to each other. We love eating together. Through engaging so much with each other, we do gradually evolve common habits and common values, common culture. But I don't interfere in your family's business, and you don't interfere in mine. And actually, that's the way that China sees itself also in the international community. But Chinese people are also prickly. So if you do interfere with them, they will, or if they feel slighted, they will get, the emotions will start to rise, and they will become very self-defensive and self-assertive. So this is how China is now entering in the international arena. So why is China not, is the perception of China in the Anglo, I would say actually in the Anglo media sphere, and I would say it's primarily there because actually when I visited all of these countries in the Belt and Road, I actually realized that those negative perceptions of China were not nearly as prevalent in those countries.
Yes.
And in fact, the general sentiment was relatively positive toward China in most of these countries.
Yes.
But nonetheless, there is a certain media, a certain kind of master narrative in the media coming from the Western world, which doesn't matter what the political, ideological orientation. It generally tends to be quite negative about China, and I think there's a few dimensions to that. And some of these are actually very deep. Others are actually just very blunt. But at a very deeper level, the Western mindset tends to view the world in a very a good versus evil way of seeing the world. You're either on the good side, and this is the Crusader mentality, actually. And in fact, the Crusades were one of the first instances of this. So I'm on the side of good, the holy, something that is very holy, a holy cause. And I'm standing up for this holy cause. So at one time it was the holy cause of Christianity. Now it could be the holy cause of democracy, or the holy cause of free enterprise, or the holy cause of whatever you want to call it. I am standing for this holy cause. And anybody who's not with me on that holy cause, they've got to be exterminated. They've either got to be exterminated or completely subjugated, because they're evil. They're absolutely evil, and so they are dangerous for the whole world and for all of humanity if they aren't with me on my crusade, on my cause. So just as with the crusade, these are causes that are very well intentioned, often with the purest of motives and ideals. But then when these crusades are actually carried out, people are pillaging, they're massacring, they're invading, they're actually exemplifying the lowest sides of human nature. But this is just basically a certain mental frame that comes out of the European and Western culture. And China is not joining those causes. it's actually not against them either in a kind of a, it's not in a counter crusade. China is not in a counter crusade. As I said earlier, the Chinese mindset is you guys do your thing on your side and we'll do our thing on our side. So there's actually no problem for China. There's no problem that you have liberal democracies here, that you have absolute monarchies there, that you have countries in total anarchy over in another place. That's their business, and I'm not going to be the only thing that matters is that we engage in our friendly relationships with each other, and you run your life the way you want to run it. I'm not going to get involved. But that's unacceptable for the crusader, this kind of crusading mindset. If you're not with me, that means you're evil. So I really think there's something at a deep level that people have a hard time to accept, that a country not only is not following on that path, but now that it's becoming very strong, it's one thing if smaller countries are not following you, and you can use economic, financial, and military means to destroy them or put them under your domination. But if the country is too strong, and so you can't do this, you can't use military, financial, technological means to destroy it or put it under your domination, then that becomes it does become an existential threat for that whole mindset, that whole good versus evil mindset. So it leads to a lot of I could say a lot of emotion, and maybe a certain amount of panic. So I think that's one reason for this. The way that China's perceived negatively, or portrayed negatively in the broadly speaking, the Western media sphere.
I think that's very helpful, actually, to think about it, in that way. Now, David, I know that your time is limited.
Yes, I need to go.
Yes. So I'm going to skip one question and end with a kind of final thing. Of course, and we all know these are very turbulent times we live in. And, for the Bitcoiners out there, that's of course reflected in the markets. There's a lot of volatility in the markets. People feel uncertain. It doesn't mean that people stop believing in the ascendancy of Bitcoin, but of course, the volatility of the world is reflected in the markets. In times of turmoil, I would say that mankind also has the opportunity to come to its senses, in a sense. And my view is that, of course, while we are progressing at the technological level, we cannot really come to true progress unless we also kind of affect the transformation at the level of human nature, human character. I think it speaks to a lot of what you have been speaking about. So I'm curious, just in this last minute, how do you view the current state of the world? And it's not a political question; it's really more of a qualitative assessment that I hope you can. Yeah, what are your views on the world, on the future?
Yeah, so first of all, I was just mentioning about, and maybe I was using some pretty strong language about the Western, what we see coming out of the West. But also, I should really say that the way I see things, all of the countries of the world, including the United States, and European countries, China and India, where I've been, which is also an amazing country, and Pakistan, right? African countries, the Middle East, where I was just my perceptions were completely transformed when I went to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. I've also been to Israel many times. All of these countries have their tensions with each other, some of them with China. Sometimes these tensions, as we can see right now, are deeply are very violent and causing a lot of suffering. But actually, let's all remember that we're all human beings, and we're all struggling to try to make sense of where we are in the world. And sometimes the way that we struggle to find our place in the world and to build our own lives and to build the lives of our family and to build the lives of our community and of our country, actually we're trying to build our lives individually and collectively, and sometimes the way we do it, we step on other people's feet. Sometimes we hurt other people. But I really believe that we're really doing the best for our own people, for ourselves and for our people. And ultimately, I believe most of us really wish for the best for all of humanity. And so let's always remember that. Let's always remember that. We're extremely diverse in this world. And this is actually to the greatest benefit of all of humanity. So as Abdu'l-Baha said, we're all like a garden. We're flowers of different colors in a garden. And a beautiful garden is a garden with many, many different flowers of multiple colors. And I also believe that we will come to that realization. So where we are now, the world is undergoing a lot of volatility and instability. Wars are going on and erupting. But it's kind of like money, in a sense. These things will lead to a higher level of consciousness. It was after World War II that then we learned about the importance of federating, of uniting, of overcoming our enmities between European countries. I hope we won't need such a bad war to move to a higher level for a consciousness of human unity. But I'm sure that that's where we're going to go. Just as I was saying earlier, the widespread adoption of money more than 2,500 years ago, in some ways, including the extremes of greed and evil that it actually contributed to, also contributed to a higher level of consciousness among the human race that actually then propelled the advancement of civilization. So I'm sure that the things that are happening now in the world will also propel a next step in the the expansion and rising of human consciousness, and in developing new ways for us to live together as human beings. Many of the tensions that we're seeing in the world today, whether it's in the financially, militarily, or geopolitically, are actually the result of old systems that are not fit for purpose. And these old systems, in their we could say within their DNA of self-preservation, are actually now running and unable to accomplish their designed purpose, are now running amok in their incapacity to do what they are designed to do. And so we're having a meltdown of multiple systems around the world. And this is causing huge amounts of turmoil at all levels. But this meltdown is also opening opportunities for designing new ways of human beings to relate to each other, to engage with each other. And whatever is the outcome of Bitcoin and so on, this is part of that experimental process. And so I think that's something that's always important to think about. But we've always also got to have this a spiritual detachment, right? The stock market goes up and down, currencies, values go up and down all the time, and that's a spiritual test as well. Those who are able to play on those markets are those whose heart is actually detached from it, and so they won't be psychologically affected. I think that's what we always need to remember, that we as human beings, we are spiritual beings with souls whose essence is beyond all of this, these different forms of currency. It's beyond all of these geographic territories, beyond all of these different races and ethnic groups. And as spiritual beings, we can understand each other heart to heart. And as spiritual beings, we can move to a higher level of global unity. So that's where I'd like to end it off.
Thank you very much. Of course, very inspiring and very happy to hear your views on this. And it was really wonderful to have you here, David. I wish we could speak for a few more hours, but I'm sure we'll do so on another occasion. So I'm going to end the recording. Please don't hang up. But we'll say goodbye to the audience, and thank you very much for joining.
Okay, goodbye, everybody.